Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. You're not seeing me, unfortunately. I was speaking to you from an undisclosed location, so you can possibly guess where it is. So I'm on Whitehall in London. This street is always known as Whitehall, not Whitehall Street. Look at Trafalgar Square. So just over here, see this Trafalgar Studios, is a theatre. If you ever watched Austin Powers, the 1997 one, they show this theatre here, or as a cinema or something like that. Look at that, Lord Moon of the Mall as a pub, a J.D. Wetherspoon pub. The J.D. Wetherspoon, well, it's the bloke who founded it, he named it after a teacher with an unusual name. They're very affordable, cheap and cheerful. Anyway, so Whitehall's one of the most iconic streets in London, so I thought that's why I'd film it. And there's no traffic today, because it's a cycling day, they've closed it to traffic. So, anyway, this is actually part of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So it's not open to the public, I'm afraid. Anyway, we should move on. There are loads of pubs, lots of places to eat and buy your souvenirs here. Loads of tourists coming just off Trafalgar Square. Oh right, Bureau de Change, I might dip in there later. So not very high rise. Anyway, just about everything you're going to see is after 1692, because there's a Whitehall Palace that occupied almost the whole street, and Whitehall Palace was burnt down in 1692, so almost everything is after that, but a lot of it's 19th century. Anyway, here, this is Old Admiralty. The Admiralty, as in an admiral, was building for administering the Royal Navy. We're actually quite close to the Thames, but I mean, proper warships couldn't sail up this far. Anyway, so you see, looks like a Pegasus on either side. One of them appears to have scales. We'll go a bit closer and find out more. Okay, so then it's now part of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Look up here, look at this sort of ancient Grecian trireme they've got going there. This thing. How about that? With a horse symbol in the middle of it. Not quite a seahorse. Okay, they're very keen on neoclassicism in the old days. Look at the Union flag up high. Not to be called the Union Jack unless it's the naval jack on a jack deck of a ship. And all these wires, I don't know what they're about. You wouldn't hang sails off those ones. Okay, and then look at this cherub here holding these two horses. Scales on the back of this horse here. Anyway, so occasionally you'll see diplomatic cars from other countries going in there when they're going to have a meeting. So it's called Foreign and Commonwealth, and the idea being the Commonwealth countries are not really foreign to each other, but they are. So we often just say Foreign Office for short, or FCO. So there we are, little what they're called columns out the front. Anyway, you may have heard of Scotland Yard, as in it's the synecdoche of the Criminal Investigation Department, and the original Scotland Yard is down there, a bit off to the left. Back to the old days when England and Scotland were separate kingdoms from each other, and Scotland had an embassy here. So then, obviously, 1603 was the unity of the crowns. 1707 was the Act of Union. England and Wales united with Scotland to form the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And there was no more Scots embassy here, nor there was an English embassy in Edinburgh. So that's that. There's a civil service club down there where we can socialise. You can see the Nigerian flag, perhaps, for a bit of the Nigerian High Commission on the corner. Difficult to make out. Okay. Anyway, we should carry on. So they're mostly government offices down here at Whitehall. Department for International Trade. Then if you look carefully above this balcony, you can see ER7, Edward VII, so from the reign of Edward VII. Look at that. Look at the detail. All the fruit and floral symbols etched into stone there. Okay, how do I get this zoom to come back out? Alright, we're back to normal. And then these two female figures up high, and some unnecessary columns here, solely for a decorative effect, I suppose. Anyway, and that's more of the Admiralty over here. You're seeing it from a different angle. As I say, it's used by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office these days. Just Foreign Office will do. The Foreign Secretary is in charge of that. Now it's Priti Patel, if memory serves. She's only appointed 12 days ago. The River Thames is down there. Perhaps you can see a bridge in the distance, a pedestrian bridge. So, because I keep trying to change there, and that's where the Thames is. So we're pretty close. Anyway, you'll see these bollards on either side. This is an anti-terrorist device, so you can't drive a car bomb and park it beside a government office. You'd be a few meters away, be a little bit less destructive. So, yet another government office. And another equestrian statue. And you see at the pedestal of the statue, there's the image of a guardsman. So these soldiers who wear those red or scarlet tunics with the black bearskin hats are dressed in this sort of uniform. Actually, the bearskin hats are copied from the French Imperial Guard, because the United Kingdom was fighting them in 1815, Battle of Waterloo. And look at the Royal Coat of Arms above, Dieu et Montois, and look at his medals. Now, this bloke, you can tell, is from the Grenadier Guards. Look at the bursting bomb as in a grenade, and his buttons are going to be 2, 2, 2, 2. Okay, the first founder was the Coldstream Guards. There are 5 regiments of foot guards, and the Coldstream Guards, they've got buttons 1, then a space, then 1, then another space, then 1. As in Grenadiers are 2, then 2, then 2, then 2, and so forth. The Scots Guards being the third founded, it's 3, then there's a space, another 3 buttons, then there's a space, another 3 buttons, there's a space, and so forth for the Irish Guards and the Welsh Guards, in that order. Okay, so this is a museum for the Household Cavalry. There are 7 regiments of the Household Brigade, sometimes called the Household Division. Their motto being Septem Juncta in Uno, 7 joined in 1. So the 2 regiments of Horse Guards are the Blues and Royals and the Life Guards. Note that Blues and Royals is 1 regiment, Blues and Royals. And then the Foot Guards, what I just mentioned, in order: Coldstream Guards, Grenadier Guards, Scots Guards, Irish Guards and Welsh Guards. And so those are the guys you see stomping around outside Buckingham Palace, the changing of the guards, 11:30 each morning. So this is the entrance to Horse Guards Parade. Let me cross over. So we're in a public street right now, but once you go through this gateway, you're part of a royal park. And so the horses are usually here. They clock off because, it's just gone 4 o'clock. The horses may kick or bite because some people think they're somehow like not real horses. They can irritate them. There is evidence the horse was here for rather a long time. Anyway, and so that's why they're on duty here. I've already filmed this. Some armed police, unusual in this country, and the Royal Coat of Arms up high. Okay, so that's enough about that. Oh, into the corner, you might see the soldier going away. Where are we going to catch a glimpse of him? You can see his red tunic. Oh yes. There, this guy is in the Life Guards because he's wearing a red tunic, or should I say scarlet. Whereas the Blues and Royals, they wear blue tunics. Surprise, surprise. We're not getting closer to him. Here's a better example. I'm not particularly interested in them today, and you can see that helmet with the plume. All right, that's enough. Wearing his big jack boots. But really we're interested in Whitehall because I filmed this on a prior occasion. I don't want it to be that bright. Zoom out. How do I zoom out? Okay, we zoomed out. So there are statues of very distinguished personages here, various army officers and colonial governors, there being the Duke of Devonshire. Obviously many people have held that title, so they tend to be known by their the number of their ordinal numbers in 1st Duke of Devonshire, 2nd Duke of Devonshire, 3rd Duke of Devonshire, and so on. Obviously it goes from father to son. What if he's got more than one son? The eldest son inherits. Obviously, have to be born within marriage. Those who are born outside of holy matrimony are disbarred. It's discriminatory, but anyway, that is the system. Okay, so this is the banqueting house. I mentioned Whitehall Palace. Now, Whitehall Palace, which burnt down in 1692. The only part of the Whitehall Palace that survived the fire is the banqueting house. So here above the door is image of King Charles I. And he reigned from 1625 until his death on the 30th of January 1649, where he was led out this window right here onto a wooden scaffold that was built up very high, and so that many people could see him as he had his head smitten from his body. Yeah, out this window here. We'll go in a bit closer for a look at him. The English Civil War, I shan't tell you the whole story of that. A very short man, born in November 1600 in Dunfermline Palace, Scotland. Of course, his father became King of England and King of Ireland in 1603. Prior to that, his father had been King James VI, King of Scots, and then he became King of England as well. So Charles I came down from Scotland and things went wrong, partly to do with this building where he met his doom, actually, because of his profligacy and spending just so much money and raising tax and ruling without Parliament for 12 years. The personal rule of Sir Charles I, his deeply unpopular religious policies, his attraction to Arminianism, taking its motto really from the Book of Psalms, worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness, as in he was an Anglican, but he seemed to be a Catholic. Was he a crypto-Catholic? He's married to Henrietta Maria, a French princess, a Roman Catholic who had Catholic chaplains in the palace, where the children were brought up as Catholics. So there was a lot of vicious anti-Catholicism. But anyway, he was also a very incompetent, unpopular king. But spending so much on Dutch old masters, Van Eyck, Van Dyck, Rubens, Bruegel the Younger, and if you go in there, you'll see some of the Dutch old masters there, and indeed their paintings on the ceiling. So you can use mirrors to look at them. And look at the artwork up there. So really destroying no distinction between public and private. That was the end of him, the banqueting house. The only thing to survive, though he did not, to survive the fire. So you can see where Parliament is there, the Sovereign Tower. Well, it's not as far as that. It's about half that distance. So it's a few hundred meters long, the banqueting house. The Thames was just the other side of the banqueting house. The Thames was twice as wide back then as it is today. So you could arrive by boat much more easily. And travelling by boat was often faster and more comfortable than the roads, which are in very poor condition, these muddy, clogged roads. And it seldom froze. The weathers were more extreme in the 17th century. Okay, look up here where the Union flag is flying. And we have cherubs. And what else do we have? We have all sorts of... No, we don't want brightness, we want to change the zoom. Yeah, crossed swords, the crown, all sorts. And they fish beside, my goodness. So we come up to various governmental offices. So this is Dover House, which previously belonged to one of the younger sons of George III, who was the Duke of York and Albany, Frederick. And then he sold it and he moved to the building which is now just known as the Albany or Piccadilly. So Dover House, I'm not quite sure it's about Dover, but it's now the Scotland office, or some people call it the Scottish office. So you can see that the Union flag as well as the cross of St Andrews, that's on that mid-blue field with a white X, symbol of Scotland. Now, so it's really administering Scotland's relations with the rest of the United Kingdom. Obviously there's been devolution in Scotland for 20 years now. Now, how did Scotland come to have the cross of St Andrews as a symbol? Well, St Regulus supposedly brought the bones of St Andrew to Scotland and reburied them there centuries after St Andrew's death. St Andrew was Greek, of course, like, Andros, it's a man, it's a very Greek name, and he felt unworthy to be crucified in the same manner as our Lord and Saviour, so he requested the Romans, would you please crucify me in an X shape? So he was. And when, I think it was St Regulus, was trying to evangelize the Scots and persuade them to turn to Christianity, there was a battle about to be fought, and the King of Scots saw the clouds form themselves into an X shape in the sky, which he took to be portentous, and indeed his arms were blessed with victory. So he thought that Christianity must be the true religion, and he converted the people en bloc. And so St Andrews was the religious capital of Scotland. Supposedly St Andrews' last mortal remains are buried there to this day. And look, here's the Welsh office, which is only founded in the 1960s. You see the Welsh dragon up there. There's that legend about how the Red Dragon of Wales fought the White Dragon of England and defeated it. And the Red Dragon is sleeping in a cave somewhere in Wales. And in Wales' hour of need, the Red Dragon shall be roused and come and rescue Wales. So you see some armed police here. All right. Now we're coming up to a memorial to women of the Second World War. It's a relatively new memorial, only been there for about 10 years, something that Gordon Brown had erected when he was Prime Minister. Okay, so another government building. This is the Cabinet Office. So we have the Cabinet, a group of roughly 25 ministers. Prime Minister, obviously chairs the Cabinet, and sometimes there's Deputy Prime Minister, sometimes there's not. There'll be a Health Secretary, Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and so on. They all have different areas of responsibility. So the Cabinet Office is partly doing their bureaucratic work for them. Okay, so over here is the Ministry of Defence. It used to be called the War Office. In the early 60s, it was given the rather more politically acceptable name of Ministry of Defence, MOD. So there we have it. So a lot of guys who are spooks who work for like MI6, That's the British External Intelligence Agency. They often say they work for the MOD, or they say they work for the Foreign Office, and they actually have to come here a lot because then they, just to know the people, be able to describe the building, to maintain their cover, that legend, know the bus routes and tube routes, so they could plausibly claim to be a member of it. Here's the Field Marshal Viscount Slim. So Slim really was his surname, not just called that because he was slim. Commander-in-Chief in Burma. See, there's the Burma Star. Defeat into victory, GR 6th, as in George VI. So he was then president of the Burma Star Association, and he was later Governor General of Australia. So came from a middle-class family in Birmingham, and it was quite difficult to rise high as an army officer with a modest background, but he did, which was really a testament to the man's tremendous abilities. And later, when he was Governor General of Australia, he was obviously dealing with many men who'd served under his command in Burma. Okay, look here, Field Marshal, the Viscount Alan Brooke, who's from Northern Ireland, County Fermanagh. So his name was actually Alan Brooke, two separate names. But as a title, he took it as one, put Alan and Brooke together into one word. So Field Marshal's the highest rank in the British Army. Good thing it's not in the United States Army, because they had General George C. Marshall. He would have been Marshal. But Marshall as a surname is usually a double L. Master of Strategy, okay, and then he had this rather honorific position, Gunner of St James's Park, as is right beside St James's Palace, which is the official residency of the British royal family, not Buckingham Palace. Look at his honours: KG, Knight of the Garter, GCB, I can't remember that, General Commander of the Order of the Bath, OM, Order of Merit, okay, General Commander of the Victorian Order and Distinguished Service Order. So you can put all these letters behind your name if you get them. A Chief of Imperial General Staff, and that was created way back in the 1890s. Okay, so for the Army, the Royal Navy, the Air Force, and not just for the United Kingdom, but for various Dominion countries like Canada, Australia, and so on, had their own armies. India, there'd be someone who'd be CIGS, Chief of Imperial General Staff. I don't know if they called it SIGs. Looking up high, I'm not quite sure what that flag is here. You do see flags of the Army, the Navy, and the Royal Air Force. Obviously, it's sky blue field for the Royal Air Force. The Army has got the Union flag in the ensign, as in the top left-hand corner, and has got crossed swords, gold swords, and then a gold lion. Whereas the Royal Navy, it's the white ensign. The top left-hand corner, you'll have the Union flag, and there'll be a red cross of St George, and the rest is white. The field is white, really. Okay, so here we go, Montgomery, Bernard Law Montgomery. So he was born here in London. His father was a clergyman near Oval, near the cricket stadium. That was always the edge of London when he was born in 1887. But he's partly Irish, family from Donegal, and I believe he was related to Mrs. C.F. Alexander, that woman who's married to the Bishop of Derry, wrote so many hymns. And his father later went on to be Bishop of Tasmania. He found his mother a very difficult authoritarian figure. He went to St Paul's School here in London, and then on to Sandhurst, the Royal Military Academy. It's a 2-year course to be an army officer in those days, not anymore. And he served in India, in Quetta, that's now Pakistan. I won't, give you a rundown of his whole career, but obviously fought in the First World War, was in Cork after the First World War, fighting against the IRA. And what else did he say? Say Cromwell would have sorted this out in a very short period of time, but we're not willing to do that. We're not willing to kill civilians, and it's fundamentally wrong not to draw a distinction between the sheep and the wolves. So that the public will not stand for what needs to be done, which would be bring in large-scale internment and so on. And because of that, Lloyd George is right to do what he did, which is simply to make peace. So Monty, as he's known, Field Marshal Montgomery, and famously in the Second World War, he won the Battle of El Alamein, November 1942. As Churchill said before, El Alamein never a victory, after El Alamein never a defeat. And then in 1944, they got into mainland Europe, or Western Europe, and he had the plan to land at Arnhem, seize the bridges over the Rhine, and then the Allies would have access to Germany itself. That was September 1944, but it was a bridge too far, as someone said. It was over-ambitious, and it was one of the last German victories on the Western Front. So it was not really him, because he tended to be very circumspect, wait till they had all the forces he needed, only then attack when he was sure of victory. Like El Alamein, not surprising they won. They had a 2-to-1 advantage numerically, and Rommel, the German commander, was flying back to Germany for medical treatment, left his number 2 in charge. What else about Montgomery? So then he was obviously in the House of Lords. because he got this noble title. What's less well known about him is what would now be regarded as an unsavory aspect of his personality in his distinctive yapping lisp denouncing homosexuality. In 1967 it was thought that they might decriminalise homosexual acts, and he said, "This is the kind of thing the French might tolerate, but we at least are British, thank God." He also supported the apartheid government in South Africa, thought that racial discrimination was laudable, and so on. Anyway, he died in 1976. He died in a very different world from the one he'd been born into. Okay, so this is the gate of Downing Street. It's named after Sir George Downing, who was Chancellor Exchequer under King Charles II. Despite having been a parliamentarian in the English Civil War, he later helped to hunt down and have executed his former colleagues. He was forgiven because he turned his coat. He was an Irishman. But anyway, his house was down here, and later that was given to the nation. Sir Robert Walpole, the first Prime Minister, generally reckoned the first Prime Minister, lived there. Really, of course, the Prime Minister's title is also First Lord of the Treasury. Prime Minister wasn't officially recognised until about 1910 as a title. And even prior to Sir Robert Walpole, the term Prime Minister had occasionally been used. But anyway, you see these anti-terrorist gates are quite difficult to get in. But until 1979, anyone could just walk up and down there, which is like any other street. But obviously it's blocked off both ends. So we're coming to the end of the War Office here. If people want to protest near Downing Street, they have to stay here, usually behind this little black barrier thing. And someone has made his feelings known about the current First Lord of the Treasury, Boris Johnson. It wasn't me. All right, so more government offices. Quite like that honey-coloured stone, don't you? I filmed this extensively, so I shan't bother again. So this is the Treasury, as in where the nation's money is dealt with. So there's the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. He or she is a cabinet minister, and there's a Chancellor of the Exchequer. In most countries, that person will be called Finance Minister. The glorious dead are the flags I'm talking about. Now, the blue ensign on the right, that is of the merchant navy, as in non-military ships simply delivering supplies. And of course, quite a few of them were killed in various wars as well. There's the Union flag, then there's a white ensign on the left of the Royal Navy. Another government building, obviously post-war construction. Imaginative, not horrid. What do you think? This one's in rather poor shape, I'm surprised. So we're still on Whitehall. It's not a short street, as you might agree. Now, what was I going to say about Sir Oswald Mosley and his British Union of Fascists and National Socialists? They had a building on Whitehall briefly, and I often wonder where it was, then in various other places too. I'd like to find out. What a scintillating and unpleasant character. Look at that. Look at the handiwork's gone into this. Up that high. Then there's this Red Lion pub. There are loads of pubs called Red Lion. It's about the most popular name for a pub in the United Kingdom. And owned by Fuller's Brewery. You'll see on the sign up high. They used to do comedy in the basement. I lost my cherry there. My comedy cherry, that is. Almost in the shadow of Parliament. So a lot of political lobbyist MPs you'll see there popping in there for some refreshment. Okay, so, and I think this one is more of the Foreign Office. I haven't got it the wrong way around. One of them is Foreign Commonwealth Office, and one of them is the Treasury. Okay, so I'm coming up onto Parliament Square. Now this bit is officially called Parliament Street. Strictly speaking, we're no longer on Whitehall, but people usually say Whitehall. So Whitehall is a synecdoche for the British government, for the civil service in particular. Okay. So look at the top of these columns. Look at that, the floral patterns up there, and these columns. So this is mostly Gilbert Scott architecture. Confusingly, there was a dynasty of architects. Sir George Gilbert Scott, Sir Gilbert Scott, and the other one, I can't remember, as in grandfather, father, and grandson. But these were all built shortly before the First World War. If you look in there, look at here, you will see Edward VII. Okay, so remember he died 1910. And then way up high, who is that crowned figure? Britannia, and a very muscular man, an amphora in the background, some topless woman being coupled by a man, trees behind them, the prow of a ship and so forth. Wow, an amphorae at the top, overflow with flowers. Someone playing the bagpipes in the background. because I don't think any of these are government buildings here. The rest of Whitehall. Okay, so we're coming on to Parliament Square. There was some cycle race. I thought just anyone would be allowed to cycle around, but no. You had to be part of the Prudential cycle race. It's sponsored by Prudential Insurance Company, or no, Prudential whatever, Building Society. They give mortgages. So you need to go to the lavatorium. Just go down here into Westminster Tube Station. That's a free public lavatory. Okay, so getting on to Parliament Square, Parliament Street. As you can see, finally the end of Whitehall. You can see why it's associated with the civil service, as there's so many government ministries along that street. Now, Parliament Square, I don't propose to tell you a great deal about it, but over here, this is the tower with Big Ben in it. Big Ben's under repair. Finally, next year, it's due to be finished. Unfortunately, it's never open to the public. I'm sure they can make a pretty penny charging people to go in and see it. So this is the House of Parliament, and that's the Sovereign Tower in the distance, which is actually considerably taller than the tower with Big Ben in it, but rather less well known. Obviously, when Her Majesty the Queen comes in early November for the state opening of Parliament, they lower the Union flag and they raise the royal standard to signify her presence. So the House of Parliament got two houses, the House of Commons, the House of Lords. You can also call it the Palace of Westminster. Strictly speaking, it is a royal palace, but no member of the royal family has resided there for centuries. So it's got certain exemptions to say licensing laws about when they're allowed to sell alcohol. Nice for the politicians. They can get blotto well past midnight. Yeah, this is Westminster Hall. You can see dead ahead. So going up through the bars, yeah, that's Westminster Hall, the near thing with the sort of the pointed roof and the two little towers on either side of it. Looks almost like a church. And so that is the oldest bit of the Palace of Westminster, the only surviving bit, because there was a fire in 1834, no doubt divine retribution for the Great Reform Act. So that dates back to the time of William Rufus, who reigned 1087 to 1100. He had a beam built with a hammer beam roof, and there's various sort of like laying estates there of the Queen Mother. For instance, I filed past her coffin, the last Empress of India, when she died in March 2002. And when a foreign dignitary addresses Parliament, he addresses them there. They can't all sit down in the same room, not in the House of Commons chamber or the House of Lords chamber. They can only all sit down here in Westminster Hall, which is huge and largely empty. The trial of King Charles I was held there and so on. So that's that, because of course you may know, as I was saying, the Parliament got down in 1834, and what we're seeing of Parliament was then rebuilt to the design of Augustus Pugin and Sir Charles Barry, and only finished in 1870. It took years to rebuild. Obviously bits of it were finished rather before that. Well, that is Portcullis House. That's where members of Parliament have their offices, most of them. Only the very high-ranking ones have one actually in Parliament. Most of them have to cross the street here. They were very badly accommodated in the 60s, certainly. I remember Jeremy Thorpe lamenting bitterly when he went to a state legislature in the United States. These people at state level had a much flusher office than he would have, even as leader of the Liberal Party in the United Kingdom. Okay, so that's enough from Whitehall. We're actually off Whitehall. Looking back at it, I'll switch it off now.